Welcome to Leading Church with Pastor Steve Kelly. We're aiming to create a space to talk through issues that all leaders in ministry face. We want to do it in authentic and transparent conversation that helps you as a leader feel connected and not alone. Today, we're going to be drilling down into the things that Pastor Steve would have loved to have known or loved someone to have told him as a younger leader. I know you're going to love this podcast. Let's tune into it. This is part one. Let's get it going. Well, a few weeks ago, you did a staff meeting that everyone just thought was incredible and we all loved, and we all said we need to put that on a podcast. And that staff meeting was about 12 things that you would tell your younger self.
Yeah.
So before we get into those 12 things, Steve, I was wondering about where did that sort of come from? What caused you to start reflecting like that?
It's conversations I have with people, and I'd say something, and I realized that was older Steve talking. Younger Steve thought differently.
Okay.
And I went, now that I'm a little older, a little wiser, got a bit more experience under my belt, I would think this, but I wished I knew that then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back when you were younger Steve, was younger Steve someone that would listen to an older Steve?
Probably not. I'm being totally honest. I wouldn't think so, which is a concern when I'm speaking to a younger generation, because they have to carve their own track and live their life. But there was definitely people I'd listen to.
Right.
But I was pretty determined to do, you're trying to make your mark. You're trying to, you want to be different. So, but there were people I'd listen to, yes.
So I've heard you use a psalm as that frames this whole thing, Psalm 71:18.
Yep.
And that psalm says, "Even when I'm old and grey, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are to come." Now I remember that for years ago coming out of you.
Yes.
Where did that come from? What caused you to reflect on that?
It was an aspirational goal
Okay.
for me when I was younger. I still want to be in the game. I still want to be. I want longevity. I used to pray a prayer, and it was like, God, please don't let me blow it. Keep me. Psalm 139, search my heart, O God, see if there's anything there. But I used to think, God, please don't let me blow it, because I've seen people before me who did.
Right.
And I remember just the impact of that, even on my life, where I went, well, if they can't make it, how will I ever make it?
Right.
And so I read David served his generation by the will of God, and then he fell asleep. And I didn't want to fall asleep before I was done serving my generation. So, Lord, let me have energy, more wisdom, more passion as I get older, not be a cynical, when I was young kind of person.
Because that's what I think that's what really resonated in our team, was it wasn't the, well, if, now you guys, as a young person, you need to listen to me.
Yes.
It came across very, very, and you'll hear in a few minutes when we start unpacking some of these.
Yeah.
It came across very differently. What is that the thinking that created that ability in you to be like that? Because we're all getting a bit older.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to be more refined. There's the old wineskin, new wineskin thing. As I get older, as I was younger, I used to look at people who were the heroes in the faith. And I set it as my goal. I want to be that older person.
Right.
And to me, how do I keep my passion? How do I keep my fervency?
Yeah.
How do I stay on fire for God? Now, the way I do that is be very intentional about bringing young people up in my life, even at this age, and valuing that more now than ever.
Right.
And being more intentional now, more than ever, about younger generation.
Right.
So, yeah.
Because I've heard you say we tend to trust people about the same age or a little bit lower.
Yeah.
But you seem to take great risks from an older person's perspective on a lot younger people.
Well, do you know what really helped me with that? Mm-hmm. Going out, I've 3 times been out on military ships.
Okay.
And twice flown onto aircraft carriers. Landed on the wire, shot off the wire, and it was who.
As only you would.
Yeah, and well, then once on a smaller aircraft carrier, it's the LHDs that carry those hovercrafts.
Yeah. Okay.
19-year-old kids are driving $7 million pieces of equipment.
Right.
19 years old, and they're trusted because they're trained.
Right.
And they're proficient and effective, and they're watching them fly these Ospreys. Kids, teenagers.
They wouldn't call themselves kids, but yeah,
You
from our perspective, I know.
No, but that's what I'm saying. And I went, this is challenging to me that the military is willing to trust and train these people with such equipment at such a young age. And we wonder whether people are old enough and eligible to be serving in leadership. And that really motivated me.
Wow. Because that's so true. Like so many older leaders seem to refuse to give younger leaders opportunity and responsibility.
Well, this is what we say. We say you don't have a brain till you're 30. Now, I do think there's things you do get wiser with.
Right.
But that means you're saying a younger generation isn't of no use to us until they grow up. They're not tomorrow's leaders. They're today's leaders.
Right.
It's the principle of developing people, first the stalk, then the blade, then the head and the kernel, then the full head and the kernel. You got to see potential in the stalk. We want the full head of kernel.
That's it.
But you've got to see potential in the stalk.
So that Psalm 71, talks about, or seems to talk about David actually wanting to be relatable to that age group and actually speak in a language that resonates with that age group.
You know, yes. And that's even when I'm old and grey, do not forsake me. And I think he's saying, God, please stay with me. And he goes, my God, until I declare your power to the next generation. I love telling young people stories. We did it today. We just today had a building team meeting with my building team that I've met with for 24 years. And we said, let's get a younger generation building team. And we filled the room with the sons and grandsons of the building team, who are the future building team leaders. And that was just Josh picking his team. And I went, look at you just picked all the generational of the people that's been in my world. And we were telling them about how we got to where we are today. And reliving some of the most, and like I used to love telling young people, and I still do, about miracles, like the angel playing the guitar, the glass exploding in that meeting,
the fire on the roof.
The fire on the roof, just talking about
was just talking about that.
Fire brigade came, there was fire on the roof.
That's
now,
right.
it better be real. Raising
well, not real fire, but fire from God.
Better be a real story.
Yeah, that's
it better not be a made-up story. That's what I'm saying. Plenty of those. Like that little baby boy raised from the dead.
Absolutely. Doing
somebody
great.
healed AIDS right here in Virginia Beach.
Yeah, I remember someone colorblind got instantly healed. Colorblind in the middle of a
during reading
the Bible.
And young people about the demons manifesting, about angels, the supernatural, and I want to declare his power because I want them to know what's available to them and what they could and should believe God for. But it's got to be real. It's got not the gold dust falling out of the ceiling, all that nonsense. Genuine, bona fide, credible miracles.
Yeah, because I think a lot of older leaders have not figured out that it's their responsibility to figure out how to communicate to another generation. And that's something that I've noticed you have been meticulous on.
Well, we as older expect them to adapt to us because we're the older sage. And yet if you don't have their ear, you don't have their respect, you can't talk their language. They'll never listen to you.
Right.
So I got 9 grandchildren. I hang around them, they keep me young.
That's right.
I know what makes them laugh.
Yeah.
If I'm boring, they'll turn off.
That is so true. That is so true. Well, let's unpack some of the thoughts that you had in this staff meeting, and for those that are listening along, all of us that are older leaders need to figure out some of our key messages and figure out how can I communicate that to those around me and the people that God has entrusted into their leadership. And I think some of these things will trigger some great thoughts in people. So the first one you said that you listed down was longevity matters more than the moment.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
So a dear friend of mine pastors a church in Australia, and he tells a story about this fight he had with his wife. And when he explains to me the fight he had, he doesn't go into detail publicly with this, but when he told me the detail from a man's perspective, I understand why he was hurt and upset,
Right.
and was mad at his wife and wanted his wife to see and understand and apologize and acknowledge that this was wrong. Well, she wasn't having it. She wasn't going to. And he was so adamant, and this is one of my dearest friends, so adamant that he was right. And when he told me, I kind of went, I see where you're coming from. But she just didn't. And he got so angry. He goes, I'm not going to discuss anything else with you until you apologize.
Oh, wow.
He goes, and he basically stalled
Wow.
the marriage because of the moment. And he was praying about it. He's a genuine godly guy. And he goes, God, I'm right on this. I know I'm right. And God said, yeah, you're so right. You're full of pride.
Oh,
And the Bible says God resists the proud, and gives grace to the humble. He goes, you're so right that I'm not on your side.
Oh, ouch.
I'm resisting you. And the Bible says, husbands, love your wives, lest your prayers be hindered. So in the moment, he was so, I'll use the word hell-bent on being right, that actually he lost sight of the relationship
Right.
and the health and the longevity. And he went to her and he just, apologized. I'm so proud. And then, of course, she broke and goes, I'm so sorry. And I noticed something there about when you have moments of digging in where you want to stand your ground, fight for this ground, but you've actually lost the longevity of a relation and you've actually taken the risk of losing, like with family and with people. You got to think, what do I want this relationship to look like
Right.
in 5 years? So if you can be the bigger person and let it go, you can take the initiative and say, I'm sorry, for the sake of the longevity of that relationship, rather than willing to, die on a hill. That's the thought. Longevity matters more than the moment.
So what are things, like how do you take that step back? Like that guy obviously heard from God, and I think that's obviously a key.
Yeah.
Get into prayer.
Well, you just value, this is probably one of the most common things I help pastors with. They get hurt with people in the church, or people in the church get hurt with the pastor, and they get an offense, and they get hurt, and that's the moment you're stuck. And now you've lost a relationship that could and should have been a God-ordained relationship. So if you can how do I make sure that the relationship matters and the longevity of this matters more than this moment?
Right.
What are you attaching value to? Are you attaching more value to the length and the long? Like what do you want this to look like in 10 years?
Right.
That's it. It's what you're attaching more value to will determine your behavior. Because remember, values determine behavior.
Right. And so obviously that means we've got to be people that can let go of a moment.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
especially if you're you're an A-type sort of person,
Sure.
totally focused.
Well, or if
and you feel like it's a moral thing or whatever.
or if you're a super feeler.
Right.
That's even harder. If you're a super sensitive person, you're going to have to work harder at that.
Right. Your
than
value
most.
is attached to that moment.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So your longevity matters more than your moment. That's a good one to think about. The second one you went to was don't let your loyalty put you into bondage to God's kingdom.
Yeah.
Loyalty. How can loyalty be when you're loyal? Isn't that
bondage
something
to
you
God.
want? Now, come
Yeah.
on. Unpack that one.
When I felt like the Lord told me to transition from the church where you and I both were a part of, and I knew the Lord opened the door for me to go work in another church. I knew the Lord called me to do it, but I love these people
Wow.
in Penrith so much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, God. And my big concern was, can I ever love people as authentically and as deeply in another environment?
Well, yeah.
And so I almost didn't do this, even though I knew God was calling me to do it, because my loyalty to the past, to the moment. It's a bit like,
Wow.
do you know when Samuel was mourning over Saul?
Yeah.
And the Lord said, how long will you mourn over Saul?
Yeah.
Get
That's
your
crazy,
oil and
yeah.
go.
Uh-huh.
There's another generation. There's more people to reach. I have more for you to do, but you're stuck with what I've done yesterday. I've rejected Saul as king. You need to move on. And I'm not talking about God rejecting people. I'm talking about me, the Lord leading me into something, and I almost didn't do it. And so to me, you can't let your loyalty put you in bondage. If you feel the Lord's calling you to go somewhere, you can't just be so bound to where you are now and to the history of where you were that you can't answer what's next in God.
I think, one of the things when you say that as a leader, I think, when you feel like God's calling you somewhere, there's a lot of people that feel like God's calling them somewhere.
Oh, and they super jump on that.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah, no, you got to
So qualify that.
Yeah,
Because what
okay.
does that mean? How do you know that really this is God?
burden doesn't necessitate timing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's huge. And sometimes God drops things in your heart, but it's for the future.
Yeah.
So you got to have a sense of timing,
Yeah, that's right.
not just a sense of calling and jump on that and answer that prematurely. If you are kicking down the doors, it's not God. God opens the doors. God's the door opener. You got to live your life with your bags packed, ready to go, but you've also got to live where you are.
Right.
You got to be in the moment.
Right.
Because if you're always thinking there's something else out there for you in your future, you'll never appreciate where you are.
Right.
So there's a tension in that. There is. I'm talking about someone who has got the timing, the multitude of counsel, wisdom,
Right.
and yet I almost didn't do it. I
Right.
almost didn't do
Right.
it. Same thing happened. I had the best job in the world back in Australia in that church. You and I were the second church you and I ended up being in, which now known as Hillsong Church. It wasn't
Great,
that when I was
yeah.
there, but
Great role.
I had the best job in the world. And yet I knew God called me to America. And there was a part of me that goes, God, I love Australia, my family, everything I know, everything I'm familiar with. And yet I think God put those things in my heart for decades. So when the time come, I would go. And I had to count the cost.
See, I think there are a lot of leaders potentially in church life that could be listening that maybe feel like they're called to somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so the longevity part of that is exactly what you're talking about. There's the wrestling of that
Yes.
feeling. So the scratching of their itchy feet.
Yep.
How do you know that it's time? Like, what's the trigger for you?
Well, I think in today's generation, there's a lot of things about, well, is the money there?
Yeah.
I've never followed the money. If that was my decision-making process, only 2 times I've changed churches, both times I took less salaries. So if it was just money,
Yeah.
it had to be the Lord. It's the multitude of wisdom. It's those who know you the best, love you the most, can confirm this is God. It's the buy-in of your spouse. It's the timing of God. It's the wisdom of God. I'm trying to think. What was the question again?
It's because I watch a lot of younger leaders, and so people who are listening, don't let your loyalty put you in bondage. So I'm loyal, I've been faithful, and I feel like there's something else, and an opportunity comes along. So why don't I just take it? Because it resonates with who I am, and I feel like, this is a great opportunity. The money's there, everything's there. From their perspective, I'm just going to jump. And I see a lot of people just run and do stuff.
Okay, so
and it's a painful experience for them.
There's a difference between went and sent.
Ooh,
so
that's what we say there, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, even though I felt God said, this is it, and the door opened for us to come to Virginia Beach, I still remember going to Brian as my senior pastor, who I trust with all my life and honor and respect. And he's my authority. He's my senior pastor. And this flies in the face of a lot of thoughts today.
Right.
It's called submission. It's called accountability.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be somewhere that I didn't trust that environment. So you've got to realize that. And I just went, mate, Sharon and I are stirred for this. We're up for it. If any reason you say no, don't tell me why. I'm not asking for any details. Just say no. We won't do it. If you say yes, we're up for it and we're stirred.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I said, God, number one, I knew God called me. Number two, Sharon had to wrestle with that, and
Right.
God spoke to her.
Right.
So number three, God's going to speak to Brian.
Right.
And I said, don't even give me, just say no, and I'll die to it. And he went, no, this is time. You've been faithful, you've been loyal, and I bless you and I send you. A lot of people, where'd they go? Oh, they went somewhere. And then they think that anointing is on them, in them. But the truth is, what they don't know, the anointing's on the house.
Right.
You find out what's really in you when those people go out and try and do their own thing. And how'd that work out for you?
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
Yeah.
So that still applies, I think. You know, we're still talking about don't let your loyalty put you in bondage. I know, having been around church for a long time, people come into your life or they'll see someone that's successful from another church or another ministry or another, and they'll think, I need that person. And because of that need, the Lord has need of it, I'm going to go and approach that person. And because of that, people get enamored maybe with the opportunity. So I think some of the things you've just outlined are so important for people to think through when they get an offer or, you know.
See, what you're talking about now is ministerial ethics.
Yeah. But see, that blurs for people.
Yeah,
Because
well-
it comes down to my calling, God's wanting to open up doors for me.
And that works both ways. It's not just a person wanting to go. It's the lack, in my opinion, and this is strong, the lack of ethics of some senior leaders that'll just hurt and empty other great teams
Right.
to get what they want because they're opportunistic.
Right.
I don't agree with that.
Right.
I think the best relationships are the ones you didn't try to make. The best relationships are the one you're not trying to keep.
Right.
I think every one of us should raise up leaders, sons and daughters. That doesn't mean there aren't people that come off one team and go to another team.
Sure.
It's about you and me.
Yeah.
You told me years ago, Steve, I believe God's called me to serve you my whole life. And I'm dedicated as long as I'm good for it because it's got to be mutual. You don't just choose me.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And I don't just choose you.
Right.
It's got to be, we both feel the same way.
Right.
And yet, when I went from Penrith to be a part of what we now know as Hillsong, you said, well, where's that leave me? And I said, well, mate, you're there.
Right.
Our friendship will be forever.
Yeah.
But then you came off team in that church, and I said, come teach in the Bible college. And then you end up working there. And then I went to America, and you went, Steve, where's that leave me? And I said, well, run the college.
Right.
And we stayed in relation. Then you went to Brian and said, I really believe my future is to be with Steve.
Right.
And you know, and I remember at the time going, I hope you told Brian I didn't ask you to come. You didn't at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, but then a couple of years later, God opened the door for you to come.
Right.
And here we are together doing life together again.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
see,
how
I wasn't trying to make a thing happen.
No.
I just being honest and upfront
Yeah.
and saying this is where I feel.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm submitted and I'll make
Yeah.
things happen.
Yeah.
And so.
Do you know, Nathan confronted David, and he confronted David about adultery. So let's not lose sight of what the confrontation is about. But look at the story that he gave. There was this man who had everything,
Right.
and he took from this man who just had one.
Yeah, that's been
And that's what sometimes, if we're not careful, really successful leaders, we just think everybody belongs to us.
Yeah.
That we're the biggest, best thing on the block, and why wouldn't people leave where they are to join, to be with me?
Yeah.
And David was so incensed by that story that he went,
That's
who
right.
did that? I'll kill him.
That's right.
And Nathan points
You're
the finger
man.
and say, you're the man.
Yeah.
And then David went, what? And then he said, you took Uriah's wife, a man, and you've got the kingdom. You're the king. You've got how many wives, concubines, and you do this? I think as pastors, there can be tremendous relationships we have with other people we connect to, but doesn't mean we sheep steal them.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I like to think I can empower these people to be better for their senior pastor.
Oh, that is so true. That is so true. But the overall principle is still the same about loyalty. Our loyalty, I think our loyalty can put us in bondage.
Yeah.
I think that was a great statement and a great thought to really think through.
That comment is about people who God is let the clouds lift it. The fire's moving. You got to move with that.
Right. Yeah.
Not about the people who are opportunistic.
Yeah. Now you moved on into your third thought that you shared with all of the team was about game face. All right, talk to us about game face. Game face matters, you said. It matters, your game face. People, what's that about?
Oh, man, there's so many thoughts there. I think, Esther, she put on game face. She made herself look beautiful and the king. She was
even though she was crushed on the inside.
Oh, yeah. And so how you present yourself matters. When I first came here 25 years ago, I'd walk into the office and talk to our then business manager, Seth Moselle, who I love this man. He's like my dad. My dad's gone to heaven. If there's a man on earth that would be like my dad, it's Seth. And I used to walk in Monday morning Tuesday morning because we had Mondays off. And I'd look at Seth and I could already know whether the offering was up, okay, or down, just by his countenance. And I said, Seth, I want to come into the office, look at you, and have no idea whether it was up or down.
Right.
I need some game face. We're not...
So you're talking about a moment
yes.
as opposed to a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, for instance, God says to Cain, why is your face downcast?
Right.
Why are you angry? And it was over money. So I say, don't let money rule your emotions. And if you got money, you're happy. You have no money, you're sad. No, you don't live like that. You don't let money, it can affect your emotions. And so that was the offering thought. And so when Paul said, be instant to Timothy, preach the word in season and out of season. What's he saying? Game face.
Yeah.
So there's going to be times when you feel like preaching and there's times when you don't. And, you've been doing this for as long as we have. I've been preaching 40 years. There's some days I'm driving to church and I've just had a big argument with Sharon. I can't imagine how God could ever help anoint me, use me. And I'm like, oh, God. And I've got pressure of things and weight of things.
Right.
And you just got to go, well, now this is a moment what Paul talked about.
Right.
Preach the word. In season, out of season.
Right.
There's times when I feel like preaching. There's times when I don't feel. There's times when I thought, God, could you ever use me? And then I go, wow, and in my weakness, his power is made perfect. And the times that I thought, man, I stunk today, have been some of the most incredible moments. People go, the most feedback I've ever got.
Right.
There's times when I thought, man, I really ripped it today. Nobody said anything. I mean, ripped it in a good way, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
So game face matters. The ability to manage your emotions and people not be able to tell what, it's like the widow. Was it the widow? Shunammite woman. And her son's dead.
Right, right.
How are things?
Yeah,
all is well.
All is well.
Game face. Do you know what I mean? And learning how to lead yourself and learning how to lead your emotions.
Yeah, especially in a key leadership, because people are going to say stuff to you.
Yeah.
If your face, you just, you fall apart because someone's telling you something that is one, you need to help them.
Yep.
And your face reveals that.
Well, somebody could say something to you right before you preach that could really rock you.
Absolutely.
Game face.
Yeah.
When you go to work, game face. Learning how to separate your private life from your professional life.
Yeah, that's a
You don't bring your home problems to work, and you don't bring your work problems to home. It's game face.
Right.
Wherever you are, be there. And that's learning how. Some people don't believe you can compartmentalize your life, but I think you can.
I'm sure you can.
I do think things bleed over and all the rest of it. But, I don't want to bring all my work problems home to Sharon. And I don't want to bring all my home problems to work. It's game face. It's learning who can speak, who can help, and how do I make sure. Jesus said his eyes were as set as flint.
Right.
He had game face.
Right. Absolutely. Look, pretty well that's all we've got time for this podcast, and we're going to continue on in the next podcast talking through these things. We've got a whole lot more to go, but I think today we've laid such a great foundation, and thank you for sharing the thoughts you had. In terms of just last thought for people out there that are thinking about 12 things you'd say, what would be the one thing you would say to an older leader about their life and what they should do?
Start with the end in mind.
Okay.
So whatever, if you're 12 years old listening to this podcast, if you're 16, if you're 24, you want to make sure you start. That's what vision does. Vision speaks to the end.
Right.
And so you got to, now when you're younger, you don't really know the fullness and the depth of what the end is. But okay, the end in mind is I want to finish well. So what are the non-negotiables that I need to build into my life now before all that success comes, that I'll make sure it doesn't change me? So start with the end in mind. Brilliant.
Well, thanks, Pastor Steve. And for everyone out there, make sure you give us a like, share the podcast, let people know that we are on, and we'll see you next time we come together, and we'll continue on these stories about 12 things you would tell your younger me. Well, thank you for joining with us today. Make sure you tune in every month for our in-depth conversations with Pastor Steve on Leading Church. Make sure you give us a like and tell your friends about us, because we would love to help them step up into everything God has for them.